Whoop, dead. Who needed the stream to be like consistently live anyway? All right. Yep. Okay. Well, whee. Yes. Yep, I absolutely can. I am saying things. Yep, I'm saying things again. Surprise, surprise. I can also keep saying things. I don't know how relevant that is. Yep. I think 25 seconds latency is perfectly reasonable. No, that was way less than a minute. Whee! Okay, yeah, can you post the link and stuff? Thank you. And suddenly I was alone again. Alrighty. So, and this is all going super smoothly, as you can all tell. Not at all a hacky solution. Okay, let me open that, and then open in the app. Look at that, that actually seems to be working. Hooray! Okay. I will just leave that playing so that I know what's going on. Alrighty, hello everyone. It's been a little bit of a journey. We are now going from Sweden over Discord to the US and then streaming from a PC in the US to YouTube. Because it seems that Starlink drops too many packets for YouTube to be able to ingest. When we go through Discord, everything's fine. So, yeah. Hello from Sweden and the US, sort of. So, I hope people are gonna trickle in a little bit. Looks like you are, so that's nice to see. Welcome everybody to start. We lost the camera in the process because it's kind of a hassle to have that work without extra latency on the Discord side. So hey ho, I don't know how much you guys cared anyway, but I sometimes like it if I'm going on tangents. We don't really have a concrete plan for this stream today, so it's kind of a chill hangout, just showing how we work with Voxel Plugin 2 internally and showing some of the cool features that we're working on, like the progressive refinement, showing some of our internal demo projects and that sort of thing. And then if any of you have any questions at any point, you can absolutely just fire away and we'll touch on them. We will not be making the plugin less expensive, Alex Mora, or at least we don't have any plans to. But what we will be doing is we will be making the free version of the plugin for Voxel Plugin 2 much more usable and fully featured than in Voxel Plugin 1, so Voxel Plugin Legacy's free version. So you will have access to graphs and everything. You'll be able to really author a world pretty well. Define progressive refinement. Yeah, so actually the demo I have open right now is not a good thing to be demoing that in, so let me switch. This is I have a lot of projects, as you can tell. We'll see. So, oh yeah, no, that did not work. Okay. Oh yeah, because it's just the wrong one actually. That's the one I need. Let's do not 5.5. Okay. So I can show the basics of progressive refinement. So what you'll see here is, for one, we've changed, although this might have already been in current preview, we had a screen size thingy in the past for controlling LOD. We've now changed that to be LOD quality. So a high number means better quality. And it's still a little bit weird and doesn't mean anything concrete, but it's going to be easier, more intuitive just because a bigger number is better. And you'll see that we now have sliders instead of just a static value. And what that does is if we hit Ctrl F5, and I'm going to want to set my thread count to lower because otherwise things are going to go too fast. I don't actually know where this lives now. Might be editor preferences then. Voxel core, yeah, there we go. Okay, so we Ctrl F5 and we look carefully and we set these to 10. We can now see that if we go far away and hit Ctrl F5, you can gradually see more detail coming into the terrain. So everything starts low resolution, and slowly, if you look here, we get little divots appearing in the mountainside. So especially if we go into the wireframe, you can see that we're really gradually increasing the resolution of the terrain. What this means is that in the past, you had, you would have to wait for chunks to compute as you'd fly around. So you'd be zooming around. Also 10 is a little bit too high maybe. So let's set that down to 8-ish. So in the past, you would be flying around and then you'd have to wait for the thing to generate in any way for it to look better. But now, you'd have to wait for the entire LOD high resolution thing to show up before you could see any updates. Whereas now we can just gradually increase the resolution of the areas you're around, which means that you're not going to say anywhere near as much LOD pop in and the like as players are moving across your world. But it also means that when you're working in editor, working with things like large brushes becomes much more responsive, because they now calculate a low resolution version of the terrain before the high resolution one. So, we have a low res blob showing what the brush changes are doing, and then the moment we let it go, it will actually refine into a high resolution version of the terrain, which makes it, much, much, much more manageable and makes iteration feel much better. Let's go have a look if the other project works. This project is an even bigger mess. This is the project where we recently did the, I guess not a lot of people actually saw that, but this is our Unreal Fest demo, the realistic one. So this, this is what we built a lot of the old example content for, with the nice cliff rocks and that sort of thing. This, I need to look at chat, which I kind of forgot. Does Voxel Plugin use compute shaders? I'm honestly not 100% sure, actually, at this point. I guess we do to some extent, but I'm not able to comment on to what extent we do. We don't do any of the generation work on the GPU. It would really just be on the rendering side of things. And I guess we probably do, because we insert some data into the Nanite pass, and if I'd had to guess, I would say that's a compute shader, but I'm not familiar with the details of that. That would be a question for our engineers. There are not going to be any differences between the paid and free version. Oh, like that. Yes, there are going to be differences between the free and the paid version. The free version is going to have some limits in place, and I can't definitively say what those limits are going to be yet. But there are going to be some changes for sure. I'm going to see if I can upgrade this project. So as you can tell, this is a little bit of a messy stream. So definitely fire away with any questions you might have. I'm going to try and upgrade this project on the fly, which is going to be great fun because it relies on a bunch of different PCG things, which changed in the last little bit. But that does bring me, if we go back to the other project, all of the foliage we have here is being generated by PCG, which, isn't super surprising because PCG is the new way we do foliage. But what is fun, and something that a lot of people don't know, is that we allow you to call voxel graphs from PCG. So we have a voxel graph here. This is what a voxel graph will, or a PCG graph using voxel terrains as a base will look like on the latest dev release and in the upcoming 2.0 P2 release. We have a voxel sampler, which now directly has the layer settings on it. We don't have the voxel landscape data getter anymore. This create points is just a dummy to make sure that the grid size thingy actually works. And then this is just to prevent empty point sets being fed into the static mesh spawner. So really, all of this is just like irrelevant, and only this actually matters. And then over here, we have a whole bunch of parameters, which right now are a mess because I didn't categorize them, but they come from a voxel graph. And if we look over here, this is our old foliage graph system, which we have repurposed to also work with PCG, which means that when you're working with, lots of math or lots of noises layering together, or layer queries from the rest of the voxel terrain and that sort of thing, you can do all of that in a voxel graph instead of having to duplicate that logic in PCG somehow, which makes it much easier to iterate quickly on foliage. And here and there, depending on what you're doing, if you're just doing basic math operations here and there, it's not going to be a huge difference. But if you're starting to do lots of noise and that sort of thing, you'll also see performance benefits to having this live in a voxel graph versus doing it through PCG, because we are really built for that kind of high throughput math, whereas PCG focuses more on the flexibility side of things. So this way, we kind of get the best of both worlds. We don't have to keep updating everything to work with, the entire instance system that is handled through PCG. So whatever Epic says is the right way to do it in PCG is what we can rely on. And then we can still work on giving you better tools to work with foliage in our own graph system if you want to. But of course, you can entirely ignore all of this and then just use PCG stock nodes. That's what we have in this other project, actually. This is entirely stock PCG. We don't use the col voxel graph in here at all. And that works fine. But it's really nice to be able to do this. And, this gives you the ability to use things like the advanced noise 2D in your foliage graphs way more easily. Let me have a look at chat for a second. So I don't actually know what U-property the fancy slider is. Maybe the engineering question is lurking here, in which case you can reply in chat. Elandos, that question would be for you. When can we expect more comprehensive documentation for Voxel Plugin? Writing documentation is really time intensive and honestly complicated, and the plugin has seen a lot of fairly big UX changes recently. And anytime that happens, all of the documentation has to go out the window again. So realistically, the documentation is not going to be in a really good spot until we actually push to release. We are actively working on documentation, and Voxel Plugin is stabilizing at the moment, so I do expect it to be improving. But I will be going on vacation the next 2 weeks, and I'm the person that writes documentation, so at least the next 2 weeks, there will not be significant improvements. Are there any plans to create separate plugins that depend on Voxel Plugin, for example, Voxel Water? We have thought about this a bunch, but the reality is just that we have so much left to do in Voxel Plugin core that, at least for the time being, it doesn't make sense to divert time and effort into other stuff. We would definitely like to explore things like water at some point, but we just can't justify it when the core plugin isn't actually ready for extensive use yet, or isn't as stable as we want it to be yet. Pricing on Voxel Plugin 2 is going to be it is going to be a single purchase, sort of. So you buy the plugin for $350 or your local equivalent. That gives you perpetual access, so permanent license, with 1 year of updates. Once that year expires, and for people that come from VP Legacy that have an automatic license, or people that buy now, that year will start counting on the moment we release Voxel Plugin 2. If you come from that time, you have a year of updates, and when that year is up, you can continue using the last version you had access to forever. You don't lose access to that. But if you want to keep using new updates that we're releasing, then you will have to relicense, and I can't comment on the pricing on that yet, because we're just not entirely sure. It depends on what the updates are going to look like, but it will not be more than the $350 we charge for an entirely new license, obviously. Will there be voxel graph examples for us to use? So actually, I guess this is really minimal in fairness, but in here, we do try and illustrate a little bit how core graphs work. So, over here, this is one of the examples, brushes and graphs. We have VHG base noise, and this just shows a really basic graph, a height graph. And then we have another one, which is more advanced. This one uses the override blend mode. And this does a bunch of weird tricks. So if you want to get creative with graphs and do advanced stuff, this is a fun one to look at. We will be building out more examples as we go. We'll be adding better mountain range generators and that sort of thing, which you guys can look at for inspiration. We also intend to add more nodes, like more options for creative control for this sort of thing in the graph, because right now, we have advanced noise. Actually, recently, we used to have only the Perlin and the Sailor noises. We recently added simplex and value, which are really similar to Perlin in a lot of ways. But if we just grab one of these nodes and grab a get position, and then we hit R to preview it. So If we look at smooth Berlin, it looks like this. If we go to smooth simplex, looks like this, which doesn't look very different, but it is a little stronger in the valleys and stuff. It looks a little more cell-like. And then we have smooth value, which is again very similar in terms of core profile, but it's more cubey, which in a lot of cases isn't desirable, but also in a lot of cases can actually end up looking really cool. So if we just go here and just change this bass noise, actually, yeah, you know what, we can just play with this for a second. This is actually, I had completely forgotten that we have this demo level, which actually works quite well. So let's set the quality here to 8. And then we'll pop down here. And again, you can see the progressive refinement as we're getting more stuff into the little hills there. So we have a bass noise here, and we'll just start playing with these noises. So bass noise, let's increase the amplitude of this a bit. Just make it more satisfying. Okay, so this is good old Perlin, which we all know and love. Very recognizable kind of noise pattern. If we set this to smooth simplex, you know, when we looked at the preview, this looks really, really similar. But what we get with simplex is more billowiness and more peaks on the actual mountains. And then if we go to smooth value, this feels more eroded in a way. This feels like an older landscape. And then obviously, you know, right now we're just setting 10 octaves all to the same thing. But you can get really creative with this. You know, you can set the different octaves to different noises. So we can have, you know, a smooth cellular as bass, which is going to give us the core mountain shape. You know, if we set it to 1 octave, this is now our bass layer. If we set this to 2, now we can add, let's say, a smooth simplex, and we add that over top. And then let's say, you know, let's do 4, and we'll just do some more of the smooth simplex because I think that works pretty well as a bass. And then we'll just do 2 that are smooth value. And then the ridged and the billowy variations that we have for each of these are absolute and inverted, so they have ridges and valleys depending on which one. So if we add a billowy value and a ridged simplex, I'm just kind of doing some things here, I'm not 100% sure, and obviously we need to update the octave count. We start getting some pretty interesting profiles. Now, I don't necessarily recommend this particular, you know, octave setup, but it does go to show, if we actually just ignore that last one particularly, we start to get very interesting terrain shapes compared to just stock Perlin noise thrown onto a world. So this is really something you want to experiment with. And then another thing that we recently added is domain warping, which takes a noise or takes a position and warps it by noise, and then you can use that to drive another noise. And if we just crank the amplitude on this, you can see that you start to get really cool, more geographical feeling ranges, so everything's way less predictable. So this is, you know, I really recommend playing with this. And, you know, this is a fancy node that encompasses it for you, but you can also just do get position and then add whatever noises you want to it. So, you know, split a struct pin and just grab an advanced noise and add it, and then use that for your advanced noise. So I'd really recommend playing with that kind of thing a lot. There's a lot that you can do with just the noise nodes within the graph. In-game editing and saving is not yet supported, but will be for the full release of Voxel Plugin 2. This is something that we intended to work on the last week or so, but due to, we implemented progressive refinements because we really ran into problems with just iteration speed. And as such, we focused on that. And then hopefully the next thing on the list is going to be sculpting, so hopefully that will be in pretty soon. BCG to voxel graph examples. We will probably have some examples for the various setups. It's just one of those things where, you know, things take time, and when the API is still changing quite a bit, it's really hard to just create examples and then keep maintaining them. Even as it is, you know, we have 3 examples for the current version, and I'm fixing them at least once a week, and regularly I get people coming in going, hey, this example is broken, why aren't things working? And I have to go like, oh, yeah, okay, time to update that. But it also creates friction for users, because every time someone downloads an example and it doesn't work, that is a pain point. So it's a bit of a tricky balancing act right now. Does it support extremely large landscapes? That is a pretty easy question for me to answer. Let's just set this to 300,000. There you go. And if we go into Alt J, this is the top-down view mode. Let's just scroll. Let's see. That's 60,000 kilometers, 60 kilometers across each axis now. And you know, we can go bigger. We have this dynamic LOD system, so you know, you don't compute a lot of values for the very far off stuff. So really, you can go as far as you would want. And especially now with the progressive refinement, you know, we'll generate a really rough out version of the entire terrain first, and then gradually refine it as you go along. So yeah, no, you can definitely do really humongous worlds. And if we just set the camera speed really high, you know, we can maybe higher, because apparently 80 isn't enough. We zoom all the way down here. Here you go. And this is just a case where I want to note, like, I just crossed 30 kilometers and we're generating with 2 threads, and this is really working relatively well. Obviously, it is not perfect, and this is quite a basic generator setup. But also, we did just basically teleport 30 kilometers away, and it just, you know, smoothly renders the entire terrain as it needs to. And examples of more complex planet generation. We do not have any examples of complex planet generation, and honestly, I don't know if we will anytime soon. Planets are always really tricky from all sorts of perspectives. Yeah, I wish I had a better answer for that. We might look at planets sometime in the future. But in a lot of ways, planets are something that coincidentally works with the plugin, but not really our core target workflow, because there are so many other issues that need to be solved whenever you're targeting planetary workflow. You need to solve, you know, nav mesh, materials become more complicated, just coordinate systems become a mess because you're working with such large worlds, and everything needs to be like relative to the planet origin instead of just functioning on a plane. Character physics don't work properly by default. Like, there's a lot of caveats with planets. So it's kind of a here be dragons thing, and because of that, we're not putting a lot of resources into guiding people on how to approach the Voxel plugin side of that. Because honestly, the Voxel plugin side of that is one of the least complicated sides of that entire discussion. When is IQ noise making a comeback? This is something that I don't have a timeline on, but we are very much looking into all kinds of different noises that we can be adding to the plugin, and if we can, you know, give people more artistic levers in the graphs again. So this is, you know, why we recently added the value and simplex noises back. And we definitely want to continue that trend. We have some pretty exciting plans for way nicer ways to work with and iterate on noise in the future, but I don't want to talk about that too much, because realistically that's going to be something that happens after 2.0 comes out. But yeah, we definitely want to keep working on that and keep improving that. Is it possible to make large planet generation with random biome placement? So it definitely is. One of the tricky things with biomes is just that we don't have a super good way. So ideally, when you're working with a planet, you want to only generate data when it's... This is interesting. It seems I have actually broken the regeneration. Let's hit Ctrl F5. Interesting. Been a while since I encountered this issue. Cool. Okay, well, I still have absolutely no idea what the repro is there. Well, I'll just put these in my copy stack, and then we'll restart and see if things behave. Yeah, sure, whatever, we'll just save that. What was I saying? Yeah, biomes. When you're doing biomes, ideally you want it so that you generate a biome mask first, so that you can then branch out your logic for different parts of the world, so that you don't, if you have 17 biomes, you don't want to compute the values for every biome for every position in the world, because realistically most of them are only going to have one biome assigned. And that's not something we have a good interface for right now. So that is the main issue. When it comes to planets, really there are no fundamental big differences in how you'd approach that workflow compared to just non-planetary terrains. The only thing is that you need to figure out how you want to project your noises. You can use 3D noise, but that's a lot harder to work with than 2D noises. But if you want to use 2D noise, you have to find a good way to project that noise onto a sphere without having seams or weird artifacts of blending different projections together. So you're kind of solving similar problems to what you would be trying to solve with triplanar materials. So that is not necessarily super trivial to do. But it's definitely possible. But like I said, there are other things that make planets really complicated that you need to look into as well. So honestly, the plugin will be able to do what you need. I would worry about other parts of that problem for the most part. How are materials assigned to the terrain and how to specify where to have which material? Okay, so this is actually pretty straightforward. Well, I say that. It is straightforward with caveats. So we have a bunch of documentation on how to work with materials, and I really would urge you to look at that if you want to understand how the material pipeline actually works. Because you need... If we look at the graph here, we are blending these two materials with a blend materials node based on per lane noise. And that just works. That's all there's to it on the graph side. And if we look at these materials, they just, have some parameters like you'd expect. And if we then look at the actual material, this is just a standard material. There isn't actually anything super interesting going on here. So it's easy to go, okay, so I just assign a random material and that will just work. Unfortunately, there's another part of the puzzle. And that is, on the voxel world, if you open the mega material, we have this fallback material assigned here. If we remove that, the engine crashes. Okay, that's not quite supposed to happen. If we remove that, we will lose the material transition. So I'll restart and then I'll just show this without removing that material. Yep. Cool. Okay, so if we go into the fallback material, and over here, we just hook 0.5 up to the voxel displacement, which will basically make it as if we don't have height. This makes it as if we don't have a fallback material. You end up with this, just flat blends. So we need to assign stuff in this fallback material, and this is where currently there's friction in the workflow, and we'd like to address this, and we have some ideas on how to do that, but it's relatively complicated, and we're not 100% confident we'll be able to make it work yet. So I don't want to promise anything, but we're hopeful that we can make this not necessary, that it'll actually just work with the other materials, and that'll be all there's to it. For as long as that's not the case, you need this. So we have voxel parameters now, which the entire pipeline works kind of like the material definitions we had previously, except it's all automatic and there's no material definitions in the background anymore. So whenever the terrain has a material assigned, for the height blends, we will go look at the fallback material, at specifically the voxel displacement. This drives the height blends and then also the nanite displacement if you use that on the material. The voxel parameters basically tell the system to go look for parameters with the same name in the materials assigned to the terrain through the graph. So in this case, we're looking for height and text size, and then we're using a special material function which uses voxel texture samples instead of regular texture samples. And then, we do some generic math, but basically this is the core of it. We grab the height and the texture size, and it grabs these dynamically from the other materials that we have assigned. So we have the gravel material, and like we pointed out, this has a height parameter and a text size parameter. So it finds those by name and then just feeds them in through here, and then you can pass that into there. The big downside with that this works the way it does is that it means that while you can do anything in your pixel shader, you can do anything like if we wanted, we could make a moss dance in the pixel shader, and that would just work, and that could be a separate material from the gravel. So we could have nodes in our moss graph, material graph, to make this move and animate, and we could not have those nodes in the gravel material, and that would just work, with now the caveat that your blends won't reflect that unless you put that same logic in your fallback material as well. So this right now is a point of friction. We hope we can resolve it, but we're not sure we can. So yeah, that's all I've got on that. This is also what we use to generate lumen scene. Although actually the lumen scene is currently broken on 5.5, so this is not going to show anything. But if we're on 5.4, this would work. So you'd see the lumen scene with base color generated. And this is also used to render the non-nanite scene. So you'll see I unticked enable nanite. I don't have displacement anymore, but I still have my height blends and I still have my base color. You'll see I don't have my normals anymore, which is because I don't actually have my normals connected here. If I cared, I could in fact just do whatever logic I'm doing here, which is just a well-aligned normal thingy, and put that into here and plug it into the normal pin, and then we would have the normals. So it is relatively straightforward at its core, but it does mean we have the big caveat that you need to have this one material that rules how your materials are blended and what your displacement looks like, despite being able to do anything in the actual pixel shader. So yeah, materials are a bit messy to work with. Hopefully we'll be able to improve it. All right, that was a long ramble. Let's have a look-see at this project that I was going to try and upgrade. Okay. This was always risky. Let's see if we actually get a crash log here, or if I'm going to have to open it in the text editor manually. It's always unfortunate when that happens. I mean, it's already unfortunate when a crash happens, admittedly, but oh, there we go. Yeah, that's cute. Okay. Interesting. Okay, let's restart that and then we'll open the material just to see if this is going to be easy to fix, because this might just be a matter of the nodes in the material being outdated. Or maybe the migration doesn't exist anymore or something. Except it means I have to figure out where all of that lives, which is fun. Oh, okay. Yeah, this is going to be a pain. Yeah. Okay. Let's have a quick little gander if I maybe updated the 5.5 version of this project already. I don't think I did, but maybe. A man can dream. Yeah, no, I did not. Okay. Yeah, I can't show this project on recent dev then, which is unfortunate. I'm gonna have to update a big pile of stuff for it to work. Okay, then we're gonna go back to this one. I'm gonna go back to the little jungle scene I had. And yeah, if anyone has anything that they would like to see or would like me to cover or touch on, definitely fire away. And otherwise, I'm just going to iterate on like making a nice looking terrain and playing with different noises and that sort of thing. Like I'll move away. The center area that I had here was initially entirely hand authored, and I've been moving towards making that more procedural. But at this point, we can just move away from this little area and start making a procedural world on the side. Because like these are height map brushes. With this is actually a fun thing. A lot of people might not know about this feature existing, but we have this min height thing on height maps. And what this does is we have this plane. So if I disable it, this is what the actual height map looks like. If I enable the min height, we get this plane showing up, and as I move that, you can see that we're generating a skirt, so we're kind of extrapolating the height map, which makes it way easier to make things like, planet-based height maps and that sort of thing. So this is really cool. We have the min height for this, and then, the slope configuration, so you can say how steep you want that fall off to be. These values are a bit hard to work with. We would like to look at improving this a bit from a UX perspective at some point, but it works as core feature. So you get this out of it, and it nicely interpolates all of the weight maps and stuff accordingly as well. So it makes it way easier to make height maps like this, because if I disable the min height on this one, and we would try and use it like this, we have this big square cutout, which is really hard to work with because you can't easily blend this with other things. So the min height makes this way more versatile, because now we can actually just use it as a separate stamp and adjust only use the interesting bit of the height map if we want to. So that's really cool. This should have a higher smoothness, and then we'll just set this to be later in the stack so that we have a nice smooth blend between everything. Okay, cool. Well, anyway, moving on from that, we'll start making some random stuff. So, I know what we can go try and do planet. And we're not going to be able to play on it in any way, because that involves a whole bunch of code stuff, which I'm not going to do. Okay, so we have this. Oh, would you look at that? I don't actually have to do this. Boop, boop. Okay. So, if we now plonk this down into the world and actually give it a radius, ta-da! We have a planet with, some caveats, obviously. Also, we have some holes. That's interesting. I wonder if the bounds are just too small. Yeah, okay, cool. So bounds on the sphere SDF node are too small. That's interesting. Okay, well, that's good enough for me. So, and this is also, you can always, right, these are now called stamps. We have a debug command which lets you render the bounds of your stamps in the scene, which is very helpful when you're trying to debug, hey, why is this thing being cut off? Because if like we remove this, this makes it relatively easy to see that the bounds are just being too tight, which is a node issue, like we should fix this, but nonetheless it helps you debug these sorts of issues, and then you can just correct it locally. So we now have sensible bounds on this. Okay, yeah, so there's a super basic planet, which obviously doesn't have all that much going for it. So there are, from here, a couple of different things we could be doing, but the easiest one is to just grab an advanced noise 3D, and then get position, and we can add to this distance. And now we have a wobbly planet. And if we go up close, we'll have that progressive refinement, making the surface look nicer and nicer as we go. And yeah, this is now, a sort of moon-looking surface. Obviously, this is not the size you'd want an average planet to be, so we can crank this. Let's just add another 0. And let's see what it's like to play here now. So this is something we added for P2. There's now, we're waiting for voxel tasks to finish before you actually play. The downside, I guess, is that we wait for all of the tasks to finish for the progressive refinement, which means that you end up waiting a while if you have a relatively high quality set as a starting point. Am I still really high up? Yes, I am. And is my fog, perchance, way too dense? Because I think it probably is. Fog. That feels like I'm probably inside the planet, doesn't it? No, not that. Come. Okay. Play. Interesting. Oh yeah, now my fog is just way too dense. There we go. Okay. There we go. So this is a planet, and if we now hit F8 and we just go zoom out, that's our character on our planet. Now, obviously, ideally, you want more than just a little bit of surface wobble. And that really is where things get complicated when you're trying to create planets, because just adding a little bit of surface wobble is relatively easy. But then a lot of the other kinds of noise that you would maybe want to try and use don't work as well when you're working in 3D instead of 2D. And it's a lot harder to just, something like the position warp I showed earlier is much harder to do in 3D than it is to do in 2D. But we can try and make something of it. So we crank that a bit. And then let's use the domain warp, which it's been a long time since I've played with 3D noise, so it'll be interesting. And it's worth noting that my sharp normals are just coming from a material where I'm doing the oldest trick in the books, which is DDX, DDY stuff. And I'm actually rendering without Nanite in this scene, which means that I'm just using the fallback material, so I don't like have the material assigned in the graph. So my normals here are just this. That gives you sharp normals with some caveats and artifacts, but it works reasonably. Something that I am seeing here is that because we're farther out, it's actually way more artifacty than it is close to the origin. So if we like go back to the actual center of the scene, it's much less jittery than on the planet, which makes sense because we're just much farther away from the origin, so we get more floating point precision issues, which is what a lot of the issues you see with this kind of trick are. We're wondering if we can maybe re-add sharp normals as like a stock plugin feature at some point, but it's not super high on the priority list for probably relatively obvious reasons. Like, it's nice to have, but also we have so many other things to do. Anyway, we have this. Let's move this a little bit further this way. But obviously right now we only have this one area. What we could do, if we wanted something biome, is interpolate between that and something else based on, say, Perlin Noise 3D. So we're just going to get position again. And this Perlin Noise 3D is the same as an advanced noise with smooth Perlin and 1 octave. So this is, if you're just using a single noise octave, you can use one of these, but you can also just do this, and the result will be the same. So we have this. We're going to grab that, and in this case, we're going to increase the feature scale quite a bit, because this is like the noise we're going to use to blend our different biomes together. So we have this billowy Perlin, and then we're going to do another area with ridged Perlin. And then we're just going to hook that up, and maybe we will make this really nice and steep and large scale and stuff. So let's see what this does. That is probably not quite what we're looking for. I probably just have way too sharp a transition. Oh yeah. So right now my amplitude is set to 1000. And if we hit R, we can see preview values. And if we zoom out, you know, you can see the min value and the max value here. And then we're plugging that into a lerp, which means that effectively our alpha, if we select this and in the preview settings we untake normalize, this is what our alpha looks like. It isn't really super great. So we probably want to set this to 1 instead. And now we have a way more reasonable looking alpha with, you know, smoother transitions. But still, we can see we have a low value in the negatives and a max value that is approaching 1. But that's not actually really ideal. That's not what we want, because we don't want that negative. So to make sure we have a 0 to 1 range, more or less, we're going to set the amplitude to 0.5 and add 0.5. And then if we preview this one, we have a min of near 0 and a max of near 1, which means we get nice smooth blends between our biomes in different areas. This isn't always what we want. You know, sometimes you don't want as much of a blend area. You want the transition between your nodes to be sharper. Again, we're going to untake normalize so that we can actually see the true state of our blends, so to speak. And then we're just going to set this to 200,000. And now we'll have a look-see. Okay, so this is fun. This looks interesting. Or at least I think it looks interesting. But this is like one of the big issues when you're working with 3D noise. What I just did works perfectly when you're working with 2D noise. You can just nicely interpolate between them and you will get, you know, different terrain heights. But because when you're working with 3D noise, you're not working with heights anymore, you're working with distances. It's just interpolating between two values makes much less sense. So, you know, we're not seeing as smooth of a transition as I'd like, and instead we're just more seeing weird artifacts. Let's try and keep increasing the feature scale here. so that we have larger biome areas. And I think at this point I probably should actually set up materials to use here. So let's enable Nanite. And then we will do blend materials, and we will use the same alpha. And now I need to go dig a material. You know what? We'll just do the good old. Hello. Oh, I forgot what I've called that. Muddy leaves. Of course, I looked for leaf in singular, so that wasn't good enough. Okay. Interesting. That is not what I was expecting. Oh yeah, because I don't have the right mega material probably. No, still not. I would be expecting right now that we, have some grey spots and some brown spots. But we don't. And I'm wondering why that is. Interesting quandaries. Because we definitely, like, I'm fairly certain that we have the different kinds of noises doing the things here. Yeah, and you can see this is all negative, this is all positive, so we definitely should be having things function to some extent. Wait, if this is all negative and this is all positive, let's times -1 this. I don't know if this makes sense. But sometimes you just gotta play with numbers and see if things work. Also, we should randomize these seeds. These two currently have the same seed, which means they will now be the exact inverse of each other, which isn't helpful. So we'll do that. And that still doesn't solve our problem, which is puzzling. Yeah. That's not the one I'm using anymore. So if we go in here and then in here. Voxel fallback weights. Let's do this. And then we will disable Nanite for a second, and then we'll be able to see what the fallback material rendering is doing. Yeah, so it really just thinks the weight of that one material is 1 everywhere, or like 0. Which is confusing. Oh, there we go. We have a thing. We have a thing. Which is strange, actually. Okay. Oh. Oh, maybe it's because not everything has a material assigned. Oof. That would be unfortunate. Yeah, okay. So if we do that. Okay, there we go. I don't know what changed. Maybe I was just being blind. Maybe I was just looking in the wrong places. But this is helpful. This is why we did the material thing, because this helps us actually see where the different biomes are. And evidently I was really misjudging where they were. So in this case, let's just crank the amplitude on this one. And that should make it a lot easier to actually see the different noises doing their thing. Yeah, so over here we now have these like properly gnarly caves. And it's worth noting, right, this looks really kind of ugly and blobby right now. But like, this is humongous. So, take it with a grain of salt. The resolution, that is. And also I'm using like horrible materials. Okay, so if we enable Nanite again, There we go. Yeah. Yeah, so over here we just have like nicely flowing terrains. Not all that gnarly. And then, you know, as we go up along the planet's side, we have this other biome where things get pretty wild, and we have a decent transition between them. Not like super smooth, but one of the problems that you run into when you try and do this kind of thing with 3D noise is that like you get all these overhangs, right? And you'll see floating bits of terrain, and there just isn't really anything we can do about this if we're working with 3D noise. So when you're doing 3D noise, you usually want to be relatively conservative with your amplitudes and that sort of thing, because otherwise you are going to get things like that. So personally, I would probably lean towards doing a triplanar projection kind of thing. Which, you know what, we'll give it a shot. I do not necessarily have super high hopes. Also, we should probably use get. Oh, can we not use doubles with our stock nodes? I guess we can't, huh? Yeah, makes sense. Okay. Get position 2D. Yeah, so we have support for doubles in the graph now. It's just that a lot of our own nodes don't support it, and when you're working with planets, you probably would want to work with doubles instead. But there isn't a whole lot I can do about that. At least, you know, right now that isn't something that we are resolving. Let me just look at Discord real quick to make sure that there's no questions being asked in there. Looks like there aren't, so that is good. Oh, well, that's fine. Yeah, okay. So we'll have a look at the planety thing. Oh yeah, fun. So the cutoff on the planet bounds earlier, where we had holes, is actually a proper bug because that shouldn't ever generate holes. It should just like have a cutoff side. But it should have mesh there. It shouldn't generate holes. So yeah, that's fun. Anyway, we were going to do triplanar. So this is going to be fun. We're going to do math and things, and we're all going to love it. So we're going to... this is going to make my head hurt, guys. We're going to get position 3D, and I'm going to make a vector 2D, and we're going to do that 3 times. So we have the XY, which is the top face. We have the YZ and the XZ planes. So we have 3 noises. And then we're going to lerp between them based on... yeah, based on... the normalized get position 3D, but then also in absolute, because we want positive values, because like if it doesn't matter if we're on the left or the right side of the planet, we want it to read 1 if we're on the side. And then we're going to split this, and if the Z is 1, then we want the top projection. And then if the Y is 1... what am I doing? Z is the XY projection, which means that Y is the XZ projection. So this is why I said this was going to make my head hurt. But I think this is worth doing as an experiment. Because if I can make this work, then that'll be really helpful for you guys to just work off as a base for this kind of thing. Okay, so we're going to like remove all of this now, and we'll just leave most of it, but we'll move it out of the way. Yeet. Disconnect all of that, and we're just going to try and hook this into here. We're going to want to, you know, have all of these have the same variables, and we're just going to make that parameters so that we can easily control them from a single place. And we probably want to do the same for the feature scale. And then we'll see how it goes. Oh wow, it looks like I didn't dramatically screw it up. That's actually kind of cool. Let's increase the amplitude a whole bunch. And of course these are parameters, so we could now also set them over here, but I prefer to do that over here when we're still trying to dial in sensible starting points. Did I... Yeah, interesting. Something broke about the tracking there. Okay, so this is actually really cool. You can now see the standard triplanar kind of thing, right? We have, you know, good looking terrain on the side here, and we have good looking, this is obviously really rough noise, but we have sensible looking terrain on the top here. But then on the side over here, we kind of have streaking because the top one is becoming like, it doesn't really make sense anymore, but it's still leaking into this side because here it's a 50-50 blend. So this is the kind of thing where, you know, you need to get a bit creative. So one of the things you could do is, right now we're just doing 3 projections. You could do more. You could do, you know, an extra projection at a 45-degree angle, but then you'd need to do that at all the 45-degree angles, so things can get pretty expensive. And you can do clever stuff to minimize that, but that is, you know, you're paying for that either in graph complexity, as in maintenance complexity, it's going to be harder for you to work with and maintain, or you're going to pay for it in performance, or both. So that is something to be mindful of. But what's really neat about this is that now, you know, we could actually have proper biomes in this way. Because now we could actually use 3D noise still to modulate, to control which biome lives where. Could we? That might not make sense, actually. Okay, yeah, so you probably want to do the same for your biome noise, like to determine which biome goes where. But you could now do this logic twice with different setups, and that will let you have different biomes with height noise. And this is valuable because now we don't have all of these weird floating bits, and it's much easier for us to like make sensible terrain maths versus on the 3D stuff. And of course, we can still also add a bit of 3D noise to this. But at least this way it's more controllable, and it gives us a guarantee that we have a sort of sensible looking base terrain. I should probably make this an example or something. But for now, what I will do is, for all you planet hungry folks, I will take this. This is 5.5, so it may not work on whatever. Oh, well, that's fun. I guess we don't have a thing anymore. Yeah, I'll put this in the show your graphs thing. And I'll like edit this to be a little bit more helpful at some point. Yeah, whatever. Also, for anyone that might be wondering about that stupid flickering, that's because Lumen is being confused by my scene. So we'll post that. And then we will plonk that in there. So just hook that up in a volume graph. Hi, Mike. Okay. I don't know if there are any questions. Let me open the stream and have a gander. I don't think there are. Yeah, I don't know. If anyone... Oh, my entire chat just actually disappeared. So there's that. Oh, there we go. I suddenly got a whole bunch of chat messages that I never ever saw. Oh boy. Okay, let me go through all this. I hope everyone that asked stuff is still watching. I'm just going to go top to bottom. So Emra asked, how costly are the height stamps? Can we use many different height stamps to create the world procedurally from something like 20 by 20 kilometer map? Yep, you can absolutely do this. So in fact, if we go back, and I'm going to remove this thing just because it's making the comparison a bit unfair. And then we're going to disable this. Come here. Ooh, my camera is way too fast for non-planetary stuff now. You know, we can plonk, 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 plonk. And I just want to note that, like, all of this we're still doing on 2 threads. And I don't know how big this world is. Right now it's not that big, I think. Let's see, 3. And this is 1 kilometer across. So each of these brushes is now 3 kilometers across. But if we just like grab another one and make it like 10, and then we probably want to reduce the vertical scale a bit. You know, this works fine. There's absolutely nothing that would stop you from doing this. And you know, this is all just generating fine, even on my 2 threads, and I can hop to the other side, and it's going to take just a moment to generate some of the resolution, but it really is really snappy for the most part. And obviously, as your generators scale, like if you start layering lots of different height maps in the same spot, your cost will get higher. But even so, if I just like copy paste this same one here 7 times, that's probably more than 7 times, honestly. If we do that and we hit Control F5. Yeah, now you can see that it's struggling a little bit more, definitely with the nearby terrain, but still 2 threads, that's, you know, fine. How often are you going to generate your world from scratch like that when your player is just walking around? So if we just like were a player even going around relatively quickly, this is unlikely to really pose a problem. Yeah, so I'm still using Starlink to stream. The stream now is me sharing screen through Discord to our engineer who's in the US currently, and then he is doing a stream of his Discord feed onto YouTube. So basically we're now doing Starlink uploading to the US, and then the US re-uploading it to YouTube, and that works fine. Problem was just that YouTube doesn't like when you have packet loss, which you inevitably do on satellite internet. Whereas my actual upload is usually fine. Can I use this for a listen server multiplayer game? Easily. Depending on what you need to do, it can be really easy or it can be really complicated. The complicated part is if you have a lot of player edits happening all the time on a large world, and you need to be able to replicate those to people in progress, so you need if you just have short matches or something and you don't need people to be able to leave and rejoin or something like that, then it's easy. But if you have a large amount of edits happening and people need to be able to rejoin, then things get complicated. So if like you're doing a Minecraft type thing, you need some kind of way to store all of the edits that players are doing and send that to joining players in an efficient way. And that can be a pretty complicated problem to solve, and it's not something we solve out of the box in the plugin at the moment. Will it be feasible to use the plugin to create spline-based paths that conform/alter the terrain for a city building type game? So spline stamps are currently in, but they're really lackluster. We're looking at doing really cool things with them, but we just haven't gotten around to it yet, and it's relatively low priority. So as the plugin is right now, I unfortunately can't say that that will be a good fit. But we definitely hope to improve that side of the tooling in the future. And something you can already do is just create a spline component on your side and spawn voxel stamps along it. Because if we just grab a voxel stamp actor and let's do a mesh, and let's find a random mesh that I have sitting somewhere. Brush meshes, yeah, let's do this one. This one works. Okay, so we have this one. You could easily just do this, and this would be largely fine in terms of generator performance. Like, this wouldn't be ideal, but that should work. And again, these are already not tiny brushes, and the resolution is pretty high. So depending on what you're doing, you should be able to get away with it, but it really does depend a bit. I don't know if I can show off material painting right now. Okay, so in order to sculpt at all right now, I need to do this, and then we do sculpt, and then we select it, and no, I can't paint right now. I can only do really basic height sculpting, sadly. Which looks to also not be especially happy right now for whatever reason. Yeah, I can't say I'm especially surprised. Oh, there we go. Yeah, the sculpting is very much not finished and something we need to do lots of fundamental work on, so I wouldn't really recommend touching this yet. Alex GSP explaining to me like I'm 5. Regular Unreal terrains are static and height maps only, so you can't have caves, you can't have overhangs, and your player can't dig a hole in it on the fly. Voxel Plugin lets you do all of that and gives you a whole bunch of tooling for procedural world creation, so generating worlds from math instead of having to manually create them, like the graph systems I've been showing. And just easy ways to put stamps in the world instead of having to manually sculpt or import big blocks of data and not being able to edit them afterwards. So that's the core of what Voxel Plugin does. Peter Nikolai, we do not currently have any alternative versus for importing tiled height map terrains other than just manually placing the stamps in the right place, unfortunately. That said, we don't have any kind of height map streaming system at the moment, so there is no functional difference on our side between between having one 16K height map and a whole pile of 1Ks. So it might be easier to just bake out a single big 16K instead. Maximilian Urban, does Voxel support large cave systems, especially in regards with lumen and dynamic lighting? All of this should work. There might be issues. I mean, the plugin is not super rigorously tested on that sort of stuff yet, but I would expect it to work for the most part. I've seen some people report weirdness with nanite tessellation and VSMs. I haven't encountered any of it myself, but yeah. I'm not super confident in saying everything will just work, but everything should in the end just work, even if it's not quite there yet. Generally speaking, when's material painting coming? I don't have a timeline, but hopefully soon. Generally, material painting, sculpting, all of that stuff is pretty much the next item on our to-do list. Broadly speaking, what kind of interaction can you have with static meshes? Is the Voxel plugin aware at all of regular geometry in the world? The short answer is no. Through PCG, you can make it so that the rest of the world is aware of the voxel terrain, and you can do gameplay queries from other actors onto the voxel terrain. So you can be like, hey, how far am I from the voxel terrain at this location, and that sort of thing, or what's the material here? But the other way around isn't really a thing. The only lever or mechanism you have for that would be, either by using sculpt operations or by spawning stamps into the scene, depending on whatever you might be doing. But actual back and forth interactions are limited. Roja, in addition to documentation, it would be great to have a series of video tutorials as you've made in the past for all types of areas, voxel, PCG, graphs, materials, etc. This is something we really want to do. The problem is that it falls on me, just like documentation and all these other things. We just have a lot to do, and it's going to be a little bit before we can actually get all of that out, especially because, as I mentioned, a lot of these systems are in flux. And I need to be really familiar with the systems to be able to make good videos on them. And right now, the way the plugin works, I'm not familiar enough with to actually produce a nice getting started type video like I did for the previous iteration. So this is on our radar. I actually tried to record this week and really struggled to get anything good out because I'm just not familiar enough with the UI right now. So it's going to take a little bit of time, unfortunately. Can we add more Minecraft-like functionality? This is something I can't say super much, but we really want to bring back Cubic, and we will in some form. But right now we're focused on making smooth terrains work to the best of our abilities before we start, branching the plugin into separate, different workflows again. So not anytime soon is the answer. Wesley Weaver, I keep running into issues with UDS and UDW real-time updating of the snow/dust depth. It's that sort of logic even possible with the way the new material system works on the displacement side. I think this should be possible, but you'd be working entirely with the Nanite displacement side of things. So really, like, Voxel plugin doesn't play a big role in this. You just use the standard Nanite displacement interfaces, except you do that in your fallback material, and then in theory it should just work. But I'm not familiar enough with those systems, like the ultradynamic sky and weather systems, to be able to comment on whether that would work with Nanite displacement versus old world position offset. Does Navmesh generate properly with PCG generation? It should. And yeah, no sad faces. I definitely think there will be people interested in, different things related to planets in the Discord. I know that we used to have a planets channel. Yeah, we still have a planets channel. We have a planets channel, and I think a lot of people are always interested in feedback from other people doing planets because there's just a lot of gameplay related tricky stuff. Ends. Do you have any interesting tips and tricks to make cliffs or other interesting terrain features using noise? I mean, it's all fiddling with numbers and trial and error. Use the preview in voxel graphs to your advantage. It makes it a lot easier to visualize what different kinds of masks are doing and that sort of thing. Layer different noises, use position, warping, and all that sort of thing. Yeah, really get creative with your numbers instead of just layering basic noises together. But that's really all I can say. Unfortunately, it's tricky. In the past, I've done like we have this node, which is true distance cell noise, and this is really neat because, you know, for one, it just outputs these cells, but then also for each of them, it outputs the position of the cell center, which means you can start doing fun things like Berlin noise 2D, and then let's do what we had here previously. You know, again, just centering this noise, so that's 0 to 1 more or less. And then we can just round this. And then we can multiply. And now, you know, this gives you interesting dynamics to do things like terracing or mountains or all that sort of thing. So, like, you know, do this sort of thing. And you can then combine this with, what's it called? The warp. I always forget what this is called. There's like lots of different terms for this kind of logic. But yeah, like, get creative. Play with your numbers. That's a bit much. But this is also a really good example. Just like, you know, now this looks like mountains. Whereas when I had this on 20,000, it just didn't really do anything helpful because it's too large scale. So the way your numbers interact relative to each other is super important. Don't discount that. Just because something doesn't look good, even though you expected it to, based on, you know, the kind of math you're doing, doesn't mean it's not going to work. You might just need to fiddle with your numbers to make it work better. Again, you know, if I crank this now looks terrible. If I have it too low, it does nothing. Where I had it just now was kind of the sweet spot. Maybe a little more, but it gets to the edge. So you really need to be... You need to fiddle and you need to build an intuition for this kind of thing. But if you don't have the intuition, you really just need to spend a lot of time fiddling. And that's kind of the only answer. But yeah, make use of the previews. You know, this gives you a lot of tools to work with. This makes it a lot easier for you to figure out, hey, what are my different noises actually doing? Because if you were looking at a world being generated with this, one, it would take way longer to generate before you have a sense of what it's doing. And two, it would be way harder to see because, like, this is just a really nice grayscale image. Gives you a really clear overview of what's happening. Whereas if you were trying to do that with a mesh, you'd have, you know, depth perception and stuff to work with, which makes it harder. Maverend, will materials on Voxel support world origin shifting? I honestly have no idea, actually. This isn't something we've tested at all. So if you do test it, definitely loop back around on the Discord to let us know how that worked. As noted, Alex Tennis, sculpting is not ready right now, so we definitely will come back to it, but it's not something I can really show extensively right now. Experto, do materials support opacity masking? They do not. This is really a cool limitation of how a Nanite rendering pipeline works. We might support some sort of masking, but it wouldn't be per pixel, it would be per vertex, but it would at least allow you to, like, not render particular parts of the terrain, if that's what you'd be looking for. Xfi, is it possible to have the rendering type to merge in cubes, and then you have mine cube is acting like cubic, so you can have a nice looking world and build / mine like Minecraft? This is not something we support right now. But it's definitely a request we get relatively often and something we're, like, thinking about how we can sensibly implement this. Zelai, how would you go about making interactive or reactive voxel liquid? Cry, honestly. There isn't a good way currently of doing it. fluid solvers are really complicated and expensive. Even on the 2D side, there are very few projects that really use complicated fluid sim at large scale for open worlds because it's just super complicated and expensive and hard to make it look good. We now have fluid flux and that sort of thing, kind of democratizing that a bit, but it still definitely has a cost. So whether you want to use it is a toss-up, and then it's still only height fields. And you can make that work with sacrifices and design decisions. Even on a voxel terrain, you can like do slices of your world that you simulate the water on. But the fact that height-based is that complicated kind of gives an impression of just how hard it is to do this volumetrically, because suddenly you have another dimension, which means, you know, on a 2D dataset, you might have been looking at 256 by 256. And then on the voxel side, now it becomes 256 by 256 by 256, which means your processing time, etc., your data storage stuff, all goes up by a factor 256. So it's exponential. So solving this problem on volumetrics is really hard. It has been done. It can be done, but it's not trivial. The only people in recent times that I know have been solving this adequately are the space engineers people on VRage, and I'm under the impression that it has been a very substantial effort on their side to make this work. Xfire, yes, you should be able to do a cap of some sort. The easiest would probably be if you have this, you know, let's I mean, the easiest is let's just do get position 3D, because I'm going to assume that you're working with 3D generation for caves and stuff anyway. You can just do this, except you can't. Okay, so if you were to just do this, this would switch your material at Z is 0 from A to B. And then on the gameplay side, when a player is trying to do a sculpt operation, you can check what the material is. And if it is A, you let them do it. And if it's B at the location they hit, then you don't let them do it. And that's kind of all there's to it. So like Voxel Plugin doesn't have a way of like blocking sculpt operations and that kind of things, at least not now. But this should be perfectly handleable on the gameplay side. Splines for roads, sculpting and painting are not good enough in their current state. No. Okay. Voxel Plugin 2 is already available to the public, but you need to own Voxel Plugin Legacy on the marketplace, and then you automatically have preview access to Voxel Plugin 2. So everything that I'm showing right now is already available to Voxel Plugin Legacy owners. If you just want to try the free version of Voxel Plugin 2, that will be coming out sometime next year. And I believe it's supposed to be Q1. And I do think we will make that. PCG Isoline will be compatible with Voxel. I honestly have no idea at this moment, Vince. Unfortunately, it's not something we've looked at all yet. But for the most part, you know, PCG does PCG things. Also, my PC is screaming. Let's lower the FPS a little bit. PCG is PCG. So, you know, we feed data into it, and I would expect it to just work for the most part. Let's have a look. See, maybe not. Yeah, that is not inspiring, admittedly. No, I guess this doesn't work with voxel terrains. No. If you have a really concrete use case, we can potentially look at what we can do for it. But yeah, it's not something we have right now. Per vertex masking is not a priority at the moment. I don't know if it'll make it in for release or not. Definitely keep asking about it on Discord as well. But there are a lot of relatively, like, it's not a huge task, but we have you know, a never-ending list of not exceptionally huge tasks, and we do need to make choices as to which ones we actually do. So it is tricky. What about repeating an SDF along a defined line or curve with each repeated SDF having an ID that can be used to modify it? This basically sounds like you would just be spawning stamps along a spline. We are looking, hopefully we will have this pretty soon actually, kind of an instant static mesh type interface, but then for stamps. So instead of having to spawn actors or components for everything, you can just add a transform to a list, and then you can set parameters for each of those transforms, and that will let you easily, you know, have thousands of stamps being added to your scene without having all of the actor or component overhead involved. Yeah, Vince, feel free to post on an actual showcase of how you're using it on Discord, because I'm just not familiar enough with how the node works to say anything helpful. And also bear in mind that spawning static mesh cliffs is not necessarily super practical in a lot of voxel use cases, because you won't be able to interact with that part of the terrain anymore because you now have the static meshes in the way. So that does complicate things. Wesley Weaver, is there any sort of graph math that can simulate erosion without actual erosion maps? There are things that can be done, and we did some of these things in Legacy. And it sort of works to some extent, but it's not ideal. We might look at adding this sort of thing back, but it's not super high priority, and we are more interested in seeing if we can add actual erosion in some form. And, you know, that won't be supported for volumetrics, and that won't be supported for you know, if you want to move a height brush on during play mode, you're probably not going to be able to erode that, but we would like to have a good workflow for, like, you know, if you place all of your height map brushes like this, that you can then do a post erosion step on the entire world and cache that in some form. But this is likely going to be a post 2.0 thing. Reskaref, is your terrain completely based on 3D algorithms like marching cubes, or do you somehow merge 2D height maps with 3D ISO surface extraction? And how does your LOD work? I actually don't remember how the LOD system works at this point, because this has changed a lot. We used to use marching cubes, we have now moved to surface nets. And we do a whole bunch of stuff under the hood to be smarter about how we handle height maps relative to volumetric data. So chunks that are height only, we try and not spend as much time processing all of the volumetrics. But what is fairly visible when you do this is you can see we have really consistent triangle density everywhere. So clearly we are doing surface nets everywhere. Like, we're not doing a standard height map meshing step for height chunks, because height maps have just really big problems with vertical surfaces or near vertical surfaces, and we don't want to bring that into, you know, a terrain system that's supposed to be good at vertical surfaces. So even for heights, we do actual volumetric meshing or 3D meshing, like surface nets, versus just spawning a 2D grid of vertices. Yeah, Cecil, there's a lot of cool stuff happening on the PCG front with that sort of thing. We've tried a bunch of things internally to try and make cliffs look good. It's been really hard, honestly. We haven't been happy with the results we've been able to create yet. But it'll definitely be interesting to see how this scene develops in the broader community, and what tools Epic keeps adding for this kind of thing. I tried. I spent many days on PCG cliff generation, and it did not get me anywhere near the results I was hoping for. while being very complex and not cheap. So yeah, make of that what you will. And obviously I don't do C++ and stuff, so I was just working with the tools I had available to me in PCG. And that was, I think, in 5.3 still. So things have changed. And I'm sure this will become ever easier or more practical to do, but at this point in time, I don't know how viable it is to do stuff like that properly with like a good level of fidelity. I'm gonna walk away for a minute to refill my water bottle. If anyone has any questions, definitely shoot them into chat. And otherwise, I will probably be ending the stream relatively soon because it's already been going for an hour and a half. So I'm going to go fill my water bottle. Let me know if there's anything else you guys want me to touch on, and I'll be back in a minute. Alrighty, I have returned. Let's have a look-see. Tristan asking, on the height map stamps you've got little streams of rock coming down. Is that all done in the material of that height map, or how is that being handled? So these height maps are actual height map assets. These are not being generated procedurally. And if we open these assets, we get this nice little preview. And in here, you'll see that we have a height map and we have a weight map. And this weight map is what controls the material. So by default, we're assigning the muddy leaves material. And then on this weight map, we are assigning gravel with a strength. So that's a multiplier over the weight map. Over the weight map. So if we increase the strength of this, you'll see that, we get way more of this. And that reflects accordingly in the world. This preview looks worse because it's not using the Nanite rendering, so this is representative. Or we can make it less, so we can make it 0.5, and now you'll see that we barely have it anywhere except for in these really steep little crevices. And this weight map is just like an erosion output from when we baked the actual height map. And again, alongside the min height thing, all of this gets extrapolated. So we try and, keep the data relatively sensible. point being, you know, you could. This is what it looks like originally, and then if you have the min height, we still continue the material data to keep all of that sensible on the skirt. So yeah, basically all of this just comes from the original height maps, and you can layer as many weight maps as you want here with different materials and different strengths, which means you can also use the same one multiple times. So like over here, I could do this, and then at a slightly lower weight, again, set things back to the leaves. Which should give us, you know, in these little crevices in the center, we should have leaves again. Yeah, except we don't have enough contrast anywhere for that to actually work. But you kind of get the idea. It works in theory. Would it be possible to make something like Enshrouded with Voxel Plugin? In terms of terrain tech, 100%. In terms of the cladding pieces that Enshrouded uses, Enshrouded is really creative with how they spawn clutter meshes over top of the voxel terrain to give it better fidelity. That is something that we don't have internally, so you'd have to explore what you can do with PCG to make that work. So yes, and would be my answer. With that, if no one else has any particular questions, that is going to be it for this stream. I will just wait just a moment to see if anything else still comes in, and otherwise we will wrap it up. So thank you all very much for coming out and hanging out to have a look at the upcoming stuff in Voxel Plugin 2 and asking all these questions. It's been fun to talk about things, and I'm very curious to see what everyone will be doing with it. Yes, Joshua, yes, and so like yes, but also there's bits of no to the answer. It's definitely possible to make something like Enshrouded with Voxel Plugin, but it's not just going to magically do Enshrouded out of the box. You're definitely going to need to put work into the, you know, clutter generation system, the skirt meshes. So yeah, thanks everyone. And we'll try and do these, you know, not necessarily super regularly, but we'll try and be a little bit more diligent about keeping you all in the loop on updates and trying to do these a little bit more as we move towards Voxel Plugin 2's release as a more mature plugin with more finished systems. So yeah, thanks for hanging out, everyone. Hope to see you on the Discord, and hope you have a lovely rest of your day. Cheers, everyone. Bye. Yeah, this is now. I need to kill this. Goodbye.